Some of the biggest changes in my life didn't come with explosions. They came quietly. No dramatic breakdown, no pack your bags, we're changing everything moment. There was no movie soundtrack swelling in the background while I realized my whole life needed a total overhaul. Most of the time, it was much less impressive than that. It was more like sitting in the middle of a normal week, drinking coffee I'd already reheated twice, looking around at my life and thinking, something's off. Not destroyed, not scandalous, just off. One of those moments came when Fletcher, our oldest, was about a year and a half old. Christy and I had always talked intentionally about priorities. God first, marriage second, family next. We meant it. We probably said it with total confidence. The kind of confidence you have before you have children and realize toddlers don't care about your theological framework for time management. Before kids, you say things like, we're going to protect our lifestyle and we're not going to let our child run everything. Then a child enters your home and immediately begins conducting sleep experiments in violation of the Geneva Convention. So somewhere in that first year and a half of parenting, we slipped into survival mode. Not rebellion, just survival. We were trying to work full time, keep a marriage healthy, serve, and keep the house from looking like a raccoon had opened a daycare in our living room. No big deal. And if I'm being honest, I was quietly trying to keep up with everyone else who looked like they had somehow figured this all out. That's usually how drift works. Nobody calls it drift while it's happening. Nobody wakes up and says, today seems like a great day to slowly move away from the priorities I claim to believe. It just happens. One not tonight at a time. One once things slow down at a time. And then one day you realize the things you said mattered most are getting whatever energy you have left. You didn't stop loving them. You just stopped protecting them. That's what's scary about all of this. Everything looked fine from the outside. We were showing up. But it wasn't collapse. It was drift. And drift is harder to name because it often looks responsible. It looks like maturity until you slow down long enough to ask, are we actually living according to the priorities we say we believe? For us, the answer was uncomfortable. We had not abandoned our priorities. We had stopped protecting them. And once you see that, you can't unsee it. Welcome to Grace in the Grind, brought to you by Arrow and Roots Coffee Company, where faith meets the everyday. Here, we take time to notice God's presence in the middle of life's busiest moments, to find encouragement, clarity, and a reminder of His grace right in the grind of daily life. So grab your coffee, and let's take a sip of this cup together. I've got some coffee date brewed today from Arrow and Roots Coffee Company. I went with a pour over this morning, mostly because I enjoy the ritual of standing there, watching it, letting it make the kitchen smell great, like a place where, adults actually live and have their lives together. I can dream. I'm drinking it black today, no cream, no sugar, just smooth, solid cup. Nothing fancy, no hidden metaphors, just a really good cup of coffee to get this day moving. Before we move on, though, if you're finding this show helpful or just funny in some ways, the best way to support us is grabbing a bag of coffee from Arrow and Roots Coffee Company. It's a simple way to keep the lights on for us and keep my caffeine levels high enough to actually make sense. Plus, let's be honest, buying a bag of genuinely good coffee is significantly cheaper than a midlife crisis, and it tastes way better than a green smoothie. Check the link in the show notes, grab some porch light or some coffee date, and help me keep this conversation going. No guilt, no pressure, just good beans for the grind. So today we're talking about the middle season, the one where nothing is falling apart, but nothing feels new either. In pot 2, we've been talking about the false dream we were sold. And part of that dream is the idea that if you are following God, you should be seeing constant, visible, upward movement. We've been conditioned to believe that progress is only evidence of God's favor. So when we hit a season where we aren't rebuilding from a wreck, but we aren't breaking ground on a new project, we get nervous. We're just there. And that's part of what makes the middle so uncomfortable. There's no obvious crisis to rally around, no clear problem to solve, no dramatic turning point you can point to and say, this is where everything changed. Life is functioning. Your faith is intact. You're doing what you know to do. And yet, something feels stalled. The tension we're feeling is this. We expected obedience to feel like progress, but sometimes obedience just feels like staying. We thought faithfulness would always come with a sense of momentum, of movement, clarity, visible growth. And when it doesn't, the question quietly forms in the back of our minds. Am I actually being formed, or am I just stuck? Our primary passage today comes from Galatians 6, verse 9. And we'll also look at a small overlooked verse in Luke 16. My hope is that by the end of this episode, you'll see that the middle is not wasted time. It's formative time. Theologically speaking, this is where sanctification usually does its slowest and deepest work. We love the word sanctification when it sounds like a transformation story, but most of the time, sanctification is just God reshaping our instincts over time. It's teaching us how to trust Him without the constant dopamine hit of a win. It's teaching us how to stay faithful when the only person watching is Him. So Galatians 6:9 says, let us not grow weary of doing good, for in due season we'll reap if we do not give up. Now, I want you to notice who Paul is talking to. He isn't writing to people who are in open rebellion. He isn't writing to people who have walked away from their faith and who are living in a scandalous mess. He's writing to people who are doing good. They are showing up. They're serving. They are being responsible. They're trying to follow the blueprint. And yet Paul knows that these are the people most at risk of growing weary. That verse doesn't exist because perseverance is easy. It exists because weariness is expected. Paul is acknowledging that doing the right thing day after day without seeing the harvest is exhausting. He doesn't shame them for being tired. He doesn't say, if you were really spiritual, you'd have more energy. He says, don't give up. Which tells us something important. The danger in the middle season isn't usually dramatic disobedience. It's quiet resignation. It's that slow internal shift from I'm trusting God here to I guess this is just how it's going to be. It's when we stop expecting God to move and we just start enduring Him. Paul anchors our hope not in immediate results, but in due season. That's Argarian language. A farmer doesn't plant a seed and then go out the next morning and scream at the dirt because there isn't a stalk of corn yet. He knows there's a hidden work happening beneath the surface that he can't see and he can't rush. The due season is God's timing, not ours. And the if in that verse, if we don't give up, is the call to remain in the field even when the dirt looks exactly like it did yesterday. Now, we're going to talk more about the due season part of this in the extra shot this week. But I want to continue on here and look at Luke 16:10. It adds another layer to this. One who is faithful in very little is also faithful in much. We usually hear that as a motivational speech like, do a good job at your entry-level position so you can get a promotion. But in the kingdom, that's not a motivational speech. It's not motivational language. It's formational language. Jesus isn't saying, hang in there and someday I'll give you something that actually matters. He's saying this is what matters. Faithfulness is not a destination for you to reach once you have a big platform or a big house or a big breakthrough. Faithfulness is a muscle that is built in the small and unseen and the repetitive. It's built in the seasons that aren't impressive enough to talk about at the dinner party. The middle is not the interruption to your real life. The middle is the training ground. We have a bad habit of dividing our lives into sacred moments, the ones where we feel God's presence or see His hand move, and ordinary moments that we just have to get through. We think God cares about our time at church, but He's indifferent about our time at the office or time folding laundry or whatever else it is we do. But that division doesn't exist in Scripture. Biblically, your vocation, your calling, isn't first about what you do for a living. It's about where God has placed you right now to live faithfully. Paul says in Colossians 3:23, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord. That verse wasn't written to people with exciting dream jobs or creative freedom. It was written to people doing repetitive, often difficult, unseen work. And Paul tells them that work is your worship, which means your job right now, your current role, your current family dynamic, your current unchanged season is not something merely to endure until your real calling shows up. It is the very place God is forming you. Not because it's glamorous, not because it's efficient, because obedience lived quietly reshapes the heart. If you look at the heroes of Scripture, they spent far more time in the middle than they did in the spotlight. Moses spent 40 years, 4 decades, shepherding sheep in the wilderness before he ever saw a burning bush. David spent his youth tending sheep and running from a crazy king before he ever sat on a throne. And Jesus himself lived 30 years in absolute obscurity in a carpenter shop before he had 3 years of public ministry. We love the 3 years of ministry. We want the miracles and the crowds, but God clearly valued the 30 years of middle. He was at work in the sawdust and the mundane. God does not wait until you have momentum to start working. He is already at work right now, in the stable, unchanged, ordinary grind of your Tuesday afternoon. Now, we have to be careful here, because for a lot of us, faithfulness has started to sound a lot like burnout. In our false dream culture, we've been told that being faithful means being exhausted. We think that if we aren't constantly pushed to our limit, we aren't doing enough for the kingdom. If your obedience currently requires 3 alarms, 2 energy drinks, and a whispered prayer at 2 p.m. that sounds like, Lord, please just get me through the next hour, we need to pause. Burnout is not a spiritual badge of honor. God is not more pleased with you because you're tired. He isn't looking at your exhaustion and thinking, wow, look at how much they love me. He's looking at you and thinking, I gave you Sabbath for a reason. If your sense of calling sounds suspiciously like your LinkedIn headline, you might not be living out vocation. You might be living out a performance. You might be trying to prove something to yourself or to your parents or to your neighbors that God has already settled. Biblical faithfulness is steady, not frantic. Faithfulness asks, what has God actually entrusted to me? Burnout asks, what am I trying to prove? And just to be clear, having limits is not a sign of weak faith. It's a sign that you're human and not the Messiah. I have some good news for you. The position of Messiah is already filled, and the guy who has that job is doing a much better job than you ever would. Faithfulness can survive a day off. Faithfulness can survive a no. Faithfulness can survive a season where you aren't the top performer. Burnout, on the other hand, panics at the idea of slowing down. And that panic tells you exactly what is really being trusted. You are trusting your own effort more than you're trusting God's providence. So, let's do a quick diagnostic. This isn't to shame you. It's just to help you notice what's going on beneath the surface of your own grind. Ask yourself, is what I'm calling faithfulness producing love, trust, and steadiness in my life? Or is it producing constant exhaustion, hidden resentment, and a low-level hum of anxiety? True faithfulness, the kind that comes from the Spirit, produces fruit, even in the middle. It might be slow fruit, but it's there. Burnout produces performance, and performance eventually cracks. Another question. Am I responding to what God has actually asked of me? Or am I reacting to expectations, comparison, or fear? Sometimes staying faithful means showing up again. It means doing the work, making the call, and folding the laundry. But sometimes staying faithful means closing the laptop, saying no without a long spiritual speech to justify it, and trusting God to keep the world spinning without your constant involvement. That's not laziness. That's trust. Here's the grace in all of this. Stable seasons are not a punishment. If you're in a season where nothing is moving, don't automatically assume it's because you've done something wrong. Don't assume God is holding out on you or you're being disciplined or put on the shelf. Waiting seasons are not wasted. Ordinary obedience is not second-class faith. God does some of his deepest and most structural work in the seasons that feel repetitive and quiet. This is how sanctification usually works. It's slow, it's steady, it happens over time, not overnight. Comparison will still whisper in your ear that you're behind. It will show up in your highlights of everyone else's breakthroughs. But Scripture reminds us that calling is not a race, and faithfulness is not a competition. Sometimes the most faithful thing you can do is just stay present right where God has already placed you. Stop waiting for the real season to start. This is the season. The clearest sign that God is at work in your life might not be a promotion or a new relationship or a big win. It might just be the fact that you haven't burned out yet. It might be the fact that you're still showing up, still praying, and still trusting, even when the dirt hasn't changed. That's not failure, that's formation. So here's the invitation for this week. Name one ordinary act of faithfulness you've been tempted to dismiss as nothing. Is it going to work and doing your job with integrity? Is it serving quietly in a way that will never get a shout out? Is it showing up for your family when you're tired? Is it praying when it feels like a routine you're just going through? Name it. And then I want you to thank God for it. Not because it feels impressive, but because it is an act of obedience. Then practice one act of trust. Let go of something you've been carrying that was never yours to hold. Maybe it's the pressure to get ahead. Maybe it's anxiety over a timeline you can't control. The goal of this life is not to prove how much you can handle. The goal is to trust God enough to stop acting like everything depends on you. If all you do this week is keep showing up, without quitting, without burning out, without giving up on the God who hasn't given up on you, that's not nothing. That's faithfulness. And Scripture tells us that God honors that far more than we usually realize. He isn't looking for heroes. He's looking for sons and daughters who trust Him in the mundane. If you know someone who feels stuck right now, someone who isn't broken, they're just tired of waiting on the next thing, share this episode with them. Sometimes people don't need a breakthrough or a miracle. They just need reassurance that staying with God is not the same thing as falling behind. It's a hard thing to admit that you aren't the hero who has to move the story forward. But there is so much mercy in that admission. You don't have to carry the weight of what's next. You just have to carry the grace of what's now. Thanks for listening to Grace in the Grind, where we keep the coffee strong and our faith stronger. Even in the middle, especially in the middle, God is still at work. We'll see you in the next cup.